Guys, I think it's about time for us to talk about Limewire. Limewire, also known as that program that blue screened your family computer, was a popular peer-to-peer file sharing software that popped up in the early 2000s. It was essentially a repository of millions of pirated songs, albums, movies, and games uploaded by random internet users like you or me. Throughout the 2000s, this was the way to get free content online. Think of it as like a Y2K Pirate Bay. Limewire was a godsend in many ways, but it was often dangerous to use and was legally controversial. Many would have their computers completely bricked by viruses acquired through Limewire, and I'm sure some of you watching have stories of this exact situation happening to you or a friend. With that said, Limewire had an impressive 10-year run that encompassed the first decade of the 2000s, ending with it being forcefully shut down in 2010 due to legal pressure and a myriad of other controversies. Today I want to tell you guys the story of Limewire, how it all started, how it became so infamous, and what were the circumstances that caused it to be shut down. And I gotta say guys, this story really is a doozy. It was difficult for me to remember all the details to it, but you know what's even harder to remember is the password to pay my damn electric bill online. I used to have to reset it like every month, but that's no longer a problem thanks to the sponsor of today's video, Dashlane. Dashlane is an easy to use app that creates and remembers passwords for you and provides account information autofills across the board. This takes the load of password management off your back. With Dashlane on board, it's easy to have dozens of accounts with unique passwords, making sure all of your accounts remain ironclad. And they fill out checkout screens for you too, so shopping is a breeze. They even notify you if a company you have an account with has some sort of data breach, and will promptly have you update your password if this is the case. And the cherry on top of everything here, guys, is that Dashlane has a VPN built into it, so you're covered on all cybersecurity fronts. With that said, give Dashlane a try for 30 days free by clicking the link below. That's dashlane.com/wavywebsurf. And if you like it, using code wavywebsurf at checkout will save you 10% off your purchase of Dashlane Premium. Anyways, let's get on to the story. The story of Limewire begins in the year 2000 with at the time 34-year-old electrical engineer slash stockbroker Mark Gorton. In the year 2000, Mark formed Limewire LLC under the umbrella of his holding company, Lime Group. The purpose behind this LLC was to develop an accessible peer-to-peer file-sharing client which allowed its users to freely share files amongst each other. The demand for such a service became clear after the massive popularity of Napster's peer-to-peer service, which launched back in 1999. Within a few months of the company's formation, Limewire LLC completed their flagship file-sharing software, which they dubbed Limewire, and it went live on May 3rd. While Mark and his company were certainly hoping that their software would catch on quickly, they were initially facing slow growth. After all, they had some pretty steep competition. It's important to note that when Limewire launched in 2000, Napster's peer-to-peer file-sharing service was still active and arguably at its peak. It would be an uphill battle for Limewire, but eventually they would become dominant over Napster. But how? Well, one factor was that unlike Napster, Limewire allowed you to share more than just music files. You could share videos, games, movies. Pretty much any file format was on the table with Limewire. But really the primary reason why Limewire took off was by necessity. Because in 2001, Napster's peer-to-peer service was shut down by court order after it lost a nasty legal battle initiated by the Recording Industry Association of America, or RIAA. It was a landmark court case, with the plaintiffs accusing Napster of egregious and large-scale copyright infringement. Dozens of record labels teamed up in the litigation against Napster, seeking reparations for the millions of pirated songs that had been circulating on the service. The labels won out, and as a result, Napster's peer-to-peer service was shut down by court order. With Napster out of the picture, Limewire quickly became the #1 source when it came to finding free media online. Throughout the early 2000s, its existence spread on internet forums and simply by word of mouth in a lot of cases. I would imagine a lot of you watching, at least if you're in my age group, heard about Limewire from a classmate at school. Hell, that's how I found out about it, and you can guarantee the day I learned about it, I went home and downloaded like every Ludacris song I could find on that thing. Look, if you were a broke kid who couldn't be bothered to pay for music, LimeWire was the ultimate solution here. But enough anecdotal banter from me, let's take a look at how LimeWire worked and what were some of the kinks associated with it. The software itself was a Java application that you simply downloaded for free from limewire.com. There was also a paid version called LimeWire Pro that promised faster speeds and better search results, but most people just went with the free basic version. After downloading and booting it up, you were faced with a search bar. In the search bar, you could type in virtually any song, movie, computer program, or game you could think of, and LimeWire would then show you a list of files matching your search keywords. After that, getting the file was as simple as highlighting it and clicking download. But hold up a second, this is where you have to exercise a bit of caution, because many of these files were laced with viruses by the uploaders, and it was often like traversing a minefield trying to find the real version of what you were looking for. Computer savvy users could typically get what they were after without a hitch. The rule of thumb was to avoid .exe files at all costs. These .exe files were almost always virus decoys. Another common sense safety measure was to check the file size. If you were trying to download, say, an entire movie, you should expect the file size to be gigs. If the file was in kilobytes or megabytes, it was almost definitely a virus decoy. And if you followed these rules, you were likely gonna be okay, but let me tell you, there were hundreds of thousands of kids across the world using LimeWire that caught all types of viruses in the process. But anyways, without bogging you down with too much technical detail about how LimeWire works, really it's as simple as searching the file, clicking it, and then hitting download. That's about it. By 2004, LimeWire had more active users and file hosters than any other peer-to-peer network on the internet. Not only that, LimeWire had become the second most popular music service online, with only iTunes being above it. It had become absolutely massive, with a user base rivaling the scale of Napster's at its 2001 peak. With that said, LimeWire, like Napster, had become a hub for rampant piracy. A majority of pirated uploads were songs and albums, and the record labels at the RIAA weren't too happy about this and were on the verge of suing. In an attempt to stave off litigation from the RIAA, LimeWire would add code to their software that attempted to block licensed content from being uploaded by its users. Think of it as a primitive version of YouTube's Content ID system. For a while this worked, placating the RIAA to an extent, but the blocking code angered many of LimeWire's users in the process. This blocking code introduced by LimeWire would ultimately result in members from the LimeWire pirating community teaming up to create a fork of LimeWire called FrostWire. FrostWire was essentially a reskinned version of LimeWire which worked very similar to the OG version. It garnered a substantial user base of its own, and it's actually still around today. But let's get back to LimeWire. So this blocking code that they put in worked to some extent, but it was actually pretty easy to bypass it. A lot of songs simply weren't being caught by the filter, and if a song that you were trying to upload was being caught by this filter, you could simply raise or lower the pitch of the song a little bit and it wouldn't be able to recognize it and it would go through. Okay. As much as they discouraged it, piracy was an inherent element to LimeWire, and there was little they could do to curb it. So in 2006, the record labels associated with the RIAA were fully fed up with LimeWire's crap and they decided to sue. Representing the RIAA, Arista Records filed a lawsuit against the company, seeking $150,000 for every single incidence of copyright infringement of their musical properties that occurred on LimeWire. Considering how much pirated RIAA music was on LimeWire, that's a lot of money. LimeWire would be tangled up in this lawsuit for years, and it was beginning to look like they were going to meet the same fate that Napster did back in 2001. We'll talk about this case more later in the video. I want to change subjects for a second here. Music piracy and record industry legal pressure wouldn't be the only headache LimeWire would be facing at this time. Another rather insidious problem had manifested on their service. That problem being the presence and spread of child pornography. Circles of sickos trading this stuff through LimeWire had been discovered by members of the LimeWire community as far back as 2005, and the problem only got worse with time. In the mid to late 2000s, this problem became a major public concern as more and more news stories were popping up showcasing individuals being arrested for being caught with the aforementioned heinous content that they got through Limewire. One of the first examples we have here is the case of Michael D. Burton, who was arrested in 2007. Burton was caught with 677 images and 132 videos on his computer. Some of the content depicted adults with children below the age of 10. In court, Burton testified that he acquired the material through Limewire. He would be found guilty on 36 counts of possession of child pornography and was sentenced to serve 20 years in a Florida state prison. There would be dozens and dozens of cases like this, which served to create a boogeyman out of Limewire in the public eye. Another huge issue was sometimes this illegal child content would be masked behind seemingly innocuous file names or bundled with adult videos. This was the case with 20-year-old Matthew White, a young man who claimed to have downloaded a large file of adult video content which contained unwanted child images. He immediately deleted the child images after discovering them. 1 year later, the FBI knocked on his door with warrants to search his hard drive and found cached versions of the files that Matthew thought were completely deleted from his computer. Matthew White was arrested and faced up to 20 years in prison. Information on his sentencing is unavailable online. So yeah, we really don't know the details of his case. We don't know if he was guilty or not, but you can begin to see the problem of this stuff being so prevalent on Limewire. And with all that explained, I think it's time for us to talk about the Limewire shutdown in 2010. You would imagine that the existence of this child content on Limewire could be the reason for it being discontinued. Perhaps the government would crack down on them and force them to shut it down. But this wasn't the cause of Limewire's 2010 discontinuation. It was rather the old perennial enemy of all peer-to-peer services, the Napster Slayer themselves, the RIAA, and their case against Limewire that was filed back in 2006. After a nearly 4-year-long court battle, the case of Arista Records LLC versus Lime Group had finally been decided on May 4th of 2010. Judge Kimball Wood of the Southern District Court of New York presided over the case. She ultimately ruled in favor of the plaintiffs and determined that Limewire was indeed responsible for large-scale copyright infringement. She also granted summary judgment to the plaintiffs' claim of unfair competition. And basically what that means is Limewire was screwed. Now let's talk about damages for a moment. As I mentioned earlier, the RIAA was seeking $150,000 for every pirated song owned by their labels uploaded to Limewire. There were figures floating around that estimated this could be as high as $75 trillion in damages. So they wanted all the money on planet Earth, I guess. Obviously, they weren't going to be awarded that, so how much did they actually get paid? Well, it's not as bad as you might think, but it's still pretty bad. $105 million. In addition to having to pay the fine, Limewire was issued a court injunction later that year in October, which required them to immediately shut down their peer-to-peer service. On October 26th of 2010, Limewire was officially killed by the record labels it had been undermining for the greater part of a decade. In a way, the death of Limewire marked the end of the golden age of peer-to-peer file sharing. And now don't get me wrong, people still pirate stuff all day long in modern times, but there's now established consequences for doing this, and it's not really the wild, wild west that it used to be. Now, wrapping things up here after hearing this story, you may feel like the death of Limewire was this blow to the consumer because we lost access to all this free media. But I feel like its death wasn't in vain. Limewire and the other various peer-to-peer networks forced the music and movie industry to adapt to the rapidly increasing popularity of the internet. People were becoming less and less inclined to spend $15 on a CD at Best Buy or $20 on a DVD at Walmart. People wanted access to an unlimited library of free content on demand. And this is sort of how we came to the compromise we have today with the music and film industries distributing their content almost entirely through streaming services, which in my opinion are extremely cost efficient and were a big win for us as consumers of media. But anyways, I digress. That, my friends, was the rise and the fall of Limewire. What did you guys think about this video? Do you have some good memories about Limewire? Do you have some bad memories about Limewire? Let me know in the comments section. And let me know who or what you want me to talk about next. I want to give a major shout out to my patrons. I appreciate you guys. Wavywebsurf out. Peace.